Clayton, tell us a little bit about yourself, life kind of before
Sure.
all this happened, and let us know a little bit about you.
So I'm ClaytonRoss. We moved to Fort Worth around 2000. Got to go in the youth group with Jay. I was very interested in architecture, and I applied to Texas A&M. I'm pausing for the whoops. I got into their architecture program. I was really excited. My senior year of high school, Jay always had us pray, lay our heads down, go ahead and get the sin out of your life and confess before worship starts, so that way you're good to go. I was really prideful, and so I, as a senior, as a leader, put my head down and basically said, God, I'm gonna bow my head so that I can be a good example to others. But you and I talked this morning, so we're already good. But I'm just doing this for show so that everybody else can be more Christian because they saw me, which is a pretty terrible insight to see. What God told me instead was, you're not going to go to A&M, you're going to go to seminary. But they don't have an architecture program. Well, I don't want you to do architecture, I want you to do missions. And so I had to call and drop out of A&M and apply to seminary, to their missions program. Fell in love with it. I was at peace with where God was sending me. I have been able to visit, I think it's 11 different countries. I got to live overseas in South Africa for 4.5 months worth the IMB. I absolutely love it. With our church, I've been able to visit East Africa. Are we still being vague, or are we still talking about?
No, yes,
Great?
Go ahead. Yes.
Great. So we got to go to Ethiopia 3 times, month and a half for the first one. Absolutely loved it. I feel a special calling towards Muslims in general. I think that is the greatest way to change the world, is to change people's hearts. So I was really excited about a potential future in missions and going to seminary, and I felt a very real call that's where I was supposed to go and what I was supposed to do. I consider myself sort of charismatic and outgoing, and at the time I thought myself to be mighty, bright, and intelligent. And an unfortunate side effect of all of that was that I was also incredibly prideful, and I had very little sympathy or empathy towards others. Brother Al, I think, was the one that played a clip from Mad TV back in the day of the worst therapist ever, where someone comes in, well, I've been drinking a lot. Well, stop it. Just stop it. And that was very much the viewpoint that I had, was if anyone is suffering from a problem, just stop. Just stop suffering. Just get over it and move on and do your next thing. Have some determination and fix it. Just be right. Everything was black and white. There was no shade of gray with me whatsoever. And God needed to fix me. And so He has allowed me to endure some things that have drastically changed my outlook and worldview over the last few years.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, because I always kind of thought that you came back from a mission trip and your health drastically changed. So how did this change in health start to happen?
Great question. So I've had problems with my physical health, my emotional health, my mental health. So I've run the gamut. In 2008, 2009, whenever I was living in South Africa, I started feeling a little homesick, which was, I think, understandable. I was missing all of my friends who were living their lives, and my family, and a girl that I was dating at the time, and I would just get homesick sometimes. But thought that was pretty normal. And I came home, and what I discovered is that the homesickness was not homesickness at all, that I was dealing with depression. But I couldn't accept that, because I was a Christian, and so I had sung the hymn, "Every Day with Jesus is Sweeter Than the Day Before," and that as a Christian you're supposed to have joy, and so it doesn't make sense for you to be a Christian who is dealing with depression. I thought things are just tough and stressful, readjusting to America after living overseas, and it was something that I couldn't shake, and the depression spiraled worse and worse and worse until I would skip my classes at seminary and just sit in a chair and stare at the wall, or lay in bed and stare at the ceiling, and that was incredibly difficult for me. There was a shame that was attached to that. There was a stigma that I had towards people who had mental illnesses that I was uncomfortable sharing. And so I tried to hide it to the best of my ability for a while. I dealt with a breakup, and I think people assumed that I was just taking the breakup hard, and it wasn't that at all. It was just that the chemicals in my brain were not working the way they were supposed to. And so I tried to shy away from some social events, but for the most part, I think I kept up the facade of being happy pretty well. I think I continued to be fun and outgoing and made jokes and went to things that I was invited to, but there was no joy. And that's what makes knowing when my health issues began so difficult. I was so fixated on the depression that everything is kind of a blur. I know at some point my depression started to get a little bit better, and I started to get up and go out. But what I found was I would wake up and eat 3 or 4 Pop-Tarts because I was an irresponsible college kid and that was breakfast, and take a shower and get dressed and start putting my shoes on, and I would wake up 45 minutes, an hour later, 2 hours later. Sometimes I would take a nap on accident for 4, 5, 6 hours, and we couldn't figure out why I kept falling asleep. I had friends that would invite me out to social events, and I would sleep for 4 hours and miss all of it. And I assumed that was just some manifestation of my depression, and we figured out after several tests I had some extreme form of hypoglycemia. And so we started drilling down on that. And we discovered there also were instances every once in a while where I would be dizzy or have a little bit of vertigo. But it was only once every 2-3 weeks, just for a couple of seconds, maybe a minute. Not a big deal. I'm a tall guy, and so I just assumed that's a tall person problem. You've got poor blood pressure or something. But they became more frequent, maybe once a week. Maybe there'd be a little bit of vertigo attached, twice a week, 3 times a week, eventually every day, then a couple of times a day, until the durations grew and the intensity grew until I didn't feel safe walking. I would have to have my hand on something as I was going by continually. I frequently would come home because I was a poor college student, and so I would do my laundry here at home and get a free dinner. And so one night I was really sick, which happened increasingly often, and so I brought my dirty clothes home to get some food and get those washed, and I never went back to my apartment. I was just so sick that I kept waiting for the day when I would feel well enough to get up again, and that day just never came. So my folks had to help move me out of that place and be here. And so this is not where I, as a 29-year-old man, expected to be. I thought that I would be working for the IMB or some mission organization in some other country, but instead I'm a 29-year-old man living in my parents' home with no job or degree or definite plans for my future. So it has been a rough time. I've had some great doctors and surgeries and procedures that have helped. It's how I'm able to sit up and have the conversation. But it was tough.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So what were some of the things, like what are some of the major symptoms of this? And how debilitating has this been to you? And maybe share a little bit about, I think you shared when you finally realized you needed to stay home. Maybe that was the time that it was like, oh man, this is bad stuff. So
yeah. Well, part of the problem is that I've had a lot of different things wrong with me. I'm kind of like the lemon of the car world, that it's just the body. Let's be, the outside looks great, but everything under the hood, it's just it doesn't work. So I've had to have a couple of eye surgeries, 2 inner ear surgeries. I dealt with depression for years and years. I've been diagnosed with 10 million different things. So for depression, I had to check myself into a mental health facility, which is not something that many of you guys know about, because it was not something I was very comfortable sharing. So I checked myself in 2011 for a week. Described it on Facebook as going on a technology fast for a week, so I wouldn't be checking Facebook or cell phone, and people were very kind to let me have the week. I had to get my mind in the right place. Again, there's not some terrible event that occurred to me. My brain just didn't give me the chemicals that I needed in the right amounts. For hypoglycemia, it was a radical change in my diet and exercise. For my inner ear, though, it was a lot harder. I went to 4 different ENTs, 2 or 3 different neurologists, a couple of primary care, 2 different internists. I've had every test you can think about. Each time I thought, this is what's going to find it, this is what's going to fix it. I always assumed I am just a week away from being better again. In my mind, there was never really a point that I had given up until my parents shut down my apartment and moved all of my stuff out for me, and I was so sick I couldn't do it. I have had needles poked through my eardrums. I've had 3 or 4 different MRIs, a couple of different PET scans, a couple of spinal taps. Ooh, they put me inside of a cylinder that was dark, and then they spun me around with a little dot on the wall. I've had them pump different temperature air in different ears at the same time, which is a party trick I would not recommend. I have had just anything. They did 13 vials of blood one day just for testing. Great news, I don't have HIV, which I told them, but we should check just in case. I've been to one of the IMB's doctors who knows weird diseases. I've been checked for that. We could not figure out what was going on. Eventually, I had an ENT who did a series of bizarre tests and figured out that I have something called superior canal dehiscence syndrome. So there's different little loops in your inner ear for the different axes, and the top one was too close to the temporal bone, which for me was too thin, and so he had to go in behind my ear and laser one of them, like cauterize it, I guess, and then put a bunch of bone paste on top to make it thicker. And the 3 days after that surgery were easily the worst of my entire life. In moving my head even just a quarter of an inch, it would feel like you were falling for miles and miles. It was just the worst sensation. The vertigo, even before surgery, the vertigo would feel like when you're halfway in the ocean and the waves are going up and down and there's that floating. I would have that. I had times where the room would spin end on end. I don't know if people do teacups, the little ride, the terrible torture device ride. That's the worst thing. But it would be like that sitting at home, and it was horrific. I couldn't drive. I couldn't walk. To shower, we had to put a little chair in the shower stall so I'd have something to sit on. It genuinely was. It was awful. It was really awful. And I'm so glad that God gave me an ENT who was able to figure out what that was. So I had that surgery in 2014. We think that my symptoms began in 2010. And so it was 4 years of doctor after doctor running out of ideas, but referring me to another, running out of ideas and referring me to another. And so I finally had a surgery, and it fixed 90% of the vertigo, maybe 85% of the dizziness, but my nausea didn't. I had dealt with incredible nausea for years and years before that. I know you guys are all having fun eating breakfast, so I won't give any details on what the nausea symptoms gave, but I saw some of my meals a couple of times. So it was. I'm so sorry, all of you eating breakfast. It was genuinely awful. So I had physical therapy again after that surgery. I had to relearn how to walk. because my brain had too many competing signals, and so I had to do some pretty exhaustive physical therapy just to be able to learn to move again. 2015, the next year, I had the same surgery again because my nausea wouldn't go away. And again, no effect on the nausea. We figured out that my eyes were not lining up properly. It was double vision, but my brain was compensating by trying to jam it into one compressed image. And so that they thought maybe was causing the nausea. So I had an eye surgery for that, but no change. So that was 2015. And that doctor ran out of ideas. And it was five or 6 years of being referred from one doctor to the next, to the next, to the next, until I finally ran out of doctors. I was pretty ready to give up, but my dad wasn't. And so he figured out that the preeminent neurologist was at Mass General, Boston, Massachusetts. So I sent every medical form I have ever had on a giant thumb drive to him. And you folks at Wedgwood were kind enough, the Holmes family set up a GoFundMe, and you guys were incredibly gracious with your giving. And I was able to afford a plane ticket there with Dad, and a hotel to stay in, and a visit to a hospital that was very, very much outside of my insurance. For 2 weeks before the visit, I called every day. Has he had a chance to look at the documents? Has he had a chance to look at my tests? Sorry, I'm trying to tell him, but he hasn't looked at them yet. Has he looked at them today? He hasn't looked at them yet. Has he looked at them today? No, he hasn't looked at them yet. And so finally flew up, and I got to visit him in his office. Okay, have you had a chance to look at my test? Oh, no, I haven't looked at your test. Let me look at, so he plugged in the little thumb drive, looked at the test. Oh, no, if I'd seen these, I could have told you there's nothing I can do to fix you. This was supposed to be the doctor. And he said, there's nothing that I can tell you that you haven't already had tested. Let me see if you can lift both of your arms. And I could. And can you touch your finger to your nose? And I could. That was it. That was it. And he said, there isn't an explanation for why you're as sick as you are physically. It's probably something mental you're dealing with. It's probably all in your head. I had a really hard time being told that it was all in my head, because there was a small part of me that was scared that maybe it was true. I had dealt with depression for years and years, and I knew that my brain could play tricks on me, and I was afraid that maybe my brain was just scared of having to readjust to the real world again, having to go to school and go to work, and maybe it was just manifesting these symptoms, and that I had wasted everybody's money, and that it was all my fault, and that my family was struggling because of me. And so I went back to the hotel room, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried, thinking that it was all my fault, and it was all in my head. And so I was scared to tell everybody that had raised all of the support that I didn't have an answer other than it was my fault. And so I wanted to withdraw. The doctor did say you could also try physical therapy. And so I did include that on my little Facebook post that I gave to everyone. Hey, thank you for giving. I was able to fly out, and he says I should try physical therapy, which is true, but I didn't give you guys the complete story. So I came back and I did some physical therapy for a couple of months, and then quit because I didn't get any results, and just sort of assumed that was the rest of my life, was just being sick. And I pretty quickly figured out it was not in my head. The nausea was very real. But I assumed I was meant to be sick forever. And that was okay. I was okay. I was genuinely okay with being sick forever because I got letters and calls and text messages and messages from my folks of people saying, Clayton, we have been praying for you every day. My prayer life has gotten deeper because I am praying for you to get better. I've got a quilt over there that was put together from people at a church that I've never heard of and Dad's never spoken at. For whatever reason, me being sick has really allowed God to deepen other people in their prayer life. And so I thought, well, this is just the way that he gets to use me. I don't get to go to Africa or the Middle East, but I get to be sick in this bed, and that's fine. And so I just sort of stayed that way until about this time last year. I got a new internist who recommended a new physical therapist, and she figured out what was wrong with me in about 15 minutes. It turns out I've got a problem with my spine. One of my vertebrae is twisted all the way to the side. She's the fourth physical therapist that I've been to, and the first physical therapist that has actually ever touched any part of my body. Everyone else just tells me to get on a bike or lift a weight, but they never actually feel to see what's wrong. And so we have been working on my spine. I'm trying to have proper posture. As soon as I start turning my head or bending it down or having poor posture, the signals get very confused in my nervous system running through the spine. My brain misinterprets that data as an acephalgic migraine, which is the migraine without the headache. It's just manifesting as nausea. So we think it's called cervical syndrome, part of the cervical spine. So I go to physical therapy twice a week. And I have been improving some. It's much better than it used to be. The last time you were here, I was stuck late in bed, and now I'm able to sit up and drive. I'm driving. Watch out. It's been an amazing change from 2014 before the surgery to today. It's night and day.
Cool. Very good. I wanted to ask how this affected some of your relationships, family, church, friends, because you've been fairly isolated, or have you? I don't know.
No. I have been isolated, and part of that has been on purpose. Here's some of this Clayton pride coming again. I saw myself as being charismatic and outgoing and personable and sociable. And when the sickness started to really take its toll, and I was stuck in that little guest bedroom decorated with beautiful butterflies per my mother's delightful style, I didn't want to see people because I didn't want to be seen as Clayton who is sick laying in bed, Clayton who can't turn his head, Clayton who has got greased matted hair because he gets sick every time he takes a shower. I didn't want to be remembered as Clayton who is sick. And so I intentionally, willfully, purposefully turned down invitations for people to come visit me because I did not want to be seen that way. I wanted to be remembered as the healthy, fun, pleasant, I don't know, maybe those are incorrect adjectives. I look forward to your feedback. That's who I wanted to be. That's who I wanted to be remembered as. And I didn't want to be seen as someone who was sick. And part of it is when I'm at my sickest, it's tough to be fun to be around. And I know that my friends care about me and they tell me, I don't care if you're feeling well, I just want to come see you. And I just hated that. I hated the idea of being seen in that vulnerable position. But I'm trying to be vulnerable today. It's uncomfortable, and I like to be seen as the well put together Clayton. But if God has made me or allowed me to be sick for this many years, it would be wasteful if I wasn't able to share how that felt. So I did isolate myself. I did have a couple of very close friends that I still kept in touch with and visited me. Dustin Moore is a deacon at Wedgwood and one of my closest friends, and so he would come and still does every week so that I can have a Sunday school lesson, which I am so appreciative of. And Scott, who is the man behind the camera, has been allowing me to see Wedgwood services streamed on Sunday mornings. And so through those two avenues, I've tried to stay connected. And part of the reason I didn't want to be seen, I was afraid that if people saw me, they would remember me and think of me, and then there would be this expectation. I saw Clayton one time, I bet he's doing better, now I can expect him to show up more often. And I can't. I'm trying. I'm getting better. Sometimes you'll see me sitting in the back. I wanted people to forget. I wanted people to forget about me, because then there wasn't an expectation that I would be there, and I didn't want to not live up to those expectations. And saying that out loud, I realize that that's a pretty unhealthy way of seeing the world, but maybe that will give insight into who I am. Facebook, I still do a little bit. Texting with folks, I still do a little bit. And I've got a small group of friends that I go see every couple of weeks. So I do have some social outlets, but by and large, I did try to isolate myself during my sickness. Yeah.
So, how did this impact your relationship with God? Like, are you having Job moments, that kind of thing? Why me?
Yeah. I don't know that if I ever had the phrase, why me? No, that's not true. I was confused why he gave me a calling, a very clear calling, I thought, to not do architecture and instead to go to seminary, and specifically to do missions that involves going. And I was trapped in bed, and that didn't make sense. And I don't pretend to know the reason why he has done it now. So there was definitely there wasn't a why did you make me sick? It was why did you give me this very clear call to go do something and then not allow me to do it? I believe it was Paul made his debut sermon and then had to be taken away and didn't get to preach for 10 years. And so there was definitely some similarity there that I attached onto, and I feel like I had a thorn in the side that I couldn't get rid of. But definitely the passage from Job, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord, was something that I adopted the last couple of years. Because I believed that the whole purpose of me being sick was to enrich the spiritual lives of others, and that this was the way that God was going to use me to affect the most number of people, was by allowing me to be and stay permanently sick. I have definitely had depth and growth in my spiritual life, and I've also had long, dry periods where I didn't care to get to know God better. I just wanted whatever distraction I could find to escape from being sick. I love video games, and so I would play them recreationally beforehand, but for the last 5, 6, 7 years, they've been, I don't think medicinal is the right term, but they've been anything to take my mind off of the sickness so that I don't notice how nauseated I am in that moment. And there have been many long periods where I have used that and anything else that I can come up with as a distraction from sickness. Unfortunately, there have been many times where I've used that as a distraction from a conversation with God. I don't think I've ever had a willful anger at him for making me sick, but there have been many times where I just haven't had the care to want to put in the effort to go any deeper. I don't know if that was punishing him for not giving me a healthy body in the mission field, but I've had my ups and downs, and the ups have been fantastic, where he has grown me and he has changed me and he has broken the parts about me that I like the least, the parts that make it harder for him to use me. He has tried to take the legalistic attitude, the pride, the I can do all things in my own strength attitude. He has taken and he has pushed and he has broken. I used to think that I was incredibly smart, and then I went to seminary and discovered Greek is a terrible language. I used to think that I was super sociable, and then I dealt with depression and shame trapped inside of a little butterfly-covered bedroom. I used to think that I was cool because I was tall and healthy, and then that doesn't matter much when you're stuck without a shower for several days, just stinking in your own filth and being awful. And I am thankful that he has taken and changed me from the self-righteous fellow that I was in high school into the man that I am today. So there have been moments of great growth, and there have been lots of times where my spiritual life was almost non-existent, just trapped in the bed and unhappy about it. Yeah.
What are some of the things that's been like helpful through this? Like anything that anybody's particularly done? You mentioned Dustin, family, friends, church that have helped you in and through this.
Dustin being willing to come over and do Sunday school for me was great. I know your Sunday school class came over once a week and prayed over me and gave me Central Market brand peanut butter, which is the best peanut butter. I'm not a snob about many things, but man, that's pretty high on my snob list. Was wonderful. People continuing to reach out to me, despite me not wanting to be reached out to, I think forced me to try and stay at least marginally connected. People telling me that my Facebook updates where I would talk about my health issues and the tests that were being done was helpful to them, and that forced me to stay connected. What I wanted to do was pull away and not be seen in my vulnerable state, and people kind of forced me to. It made me uncomfortable, and at the time I did not enjoy it, but now having been through it, I'm thankful that those years were not spent being wasted and instead were able to be useful. So I am very appreciative of that. And I'm thankful to those of you who texted and left voicemails and were patient enough to wait 2, 3, 4 days for me to work up the gumption to text back. It's something that I still struggle with. I get some anxiety about handling social situations now, because there's still some fear of unmet expectations. And it's something that I'm working on. I'm working on finding a Sunday school class. That makes me real nervous because there's lots of different people that are inviting me to theirs, and I don't know how to pick just one. So who knows? Maybe I'll just go to a different one every week, because that's how fellowships work. Sorry, wait, no, missional
community.
Missional communities,
yes,
is what I am endorsing.
That's great.
Thank you.
Oh man. All right, so I kind of hesitate to ask this, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask it anyway. So helpful. All right. So is there anything that you've been disappointed with as far as people, friends, church?
Disappointed.
Or not helpful. I don't know.
Yeah. When I was dealing with a chronic health issue, people that love me and want the best for me also want to try and find ways to help me, which is admirable and respectable, and I 100% understand where that's coming from. But sometimes people go about it in a less than ideal way, and I might misinterpret what they're saying as, you haven't tried hard enough. And that's not an easy emotion for me to deal with. I listed some of the tests that I've endured, and that was just a small fraction. I've been poked and prodded and spun and bled every which way that I can imagine. And someone would come up to me and say, well, if you just tried da-da-da-da-da, man, I did. And 7 other versions of the same thing. I have tried acupuncture. I've tried oils, the essential oils, yes. And I'm sure that's great for some folk. I've tried ginger extract. I've tried ginger beer. It's not alcoholic. We're okay. I've tried every which thing that people can imagine, but never did I ever think there would be a beneficial effect. It was just so that person could feel like they had contributed. And I grew tired of having to do that for other people to feel like they were contributing. And that's, again, there's not a single one of y'all that did anything wrong. It was just tiring for me. Another issue that was difficult would be people who would say, I have been praying for you, and I think God is telling me you're going to be healed soon. It is not my place to tell you what you were or were not interpreting, because I have no clue. And it may very well be that God told that person that Clayton is going to be healed soon. That's a whole other issue. What I can say is I grew very tired of hearing people say that. And I would often say, oh, well, thanks. Let's see. And I eventually grew callous enough where I would say, I don't think so. I don't think that I'm going to be better. I don't think that I'm going to be better at all, much less soon. And I think that some people saw that as pessimistic or cynical or depressed, and I don't think that it was. If you told me in January in Texas it may snow next week, I would say, maybe. It's optimistic, but maybe. I'll go along with your optimistic view that it may snow. But if you tell me in August that it's going to snow next week, and I say no, that's not cynicism or pessimism. That's just being aware of how the weather works. And so for me, in my body, I felt more aware of whether I was going to be better soon or not. Another reason that I wanted to pull away from people, they would ask me how I was doing, and my knee-jerk reaction was to say, oh, I'm doing great, how are you? But I can't fake that when I'm laying in a bed. And so I'd have to tell people the full story of my health. And that made people really sad because they genuinely cared about me. They didn't want me to be sick. But I'm a people pleaser, and so I didn't want to see them be sad about me being sick, and so I just didn't want to answer the question at all because it kept making people sad when I say, well, I throw up 3 or 4 times a week, and I can't walk, and showering is an almost painfully terrible experience. And there are 17 different foods that I just can't eat anymore, and certain smells make me upset. It's such a long, unpleasant story to share with someone. I just didn't want to share it at all. And I could tell that people were grieved whenever I told them about it, which is, again, it's not wrong. I would be a little bit upset if you were pleased at how sick that I was. But what made it difficult was seeing that pain in other people. And so I decided, well, I'll just hold on to it for just me instead. That's easier for me just to hold on to the pain instead of letting other people in on it. And I question that choice now. But at the time, it was really difficult to let people know about it. And the third issue was people being... I don't know how to phrase this right. Believing that it was God's plan for me to be well soon, and that what I was dealing with was a curse or an evil or a devil or something like that. That when I'm healthy, it's because God makes me healthy, and whenever I'm sick, it's because of some other reason. And I was upset. I don't think that we get to say things that make me happy are from God and things that make me sad are not. That it's okay It's okay to be sick. It's okay to be stuck in bed. It's not a lack of God's will. It's not a sign of his weakness. It's not a sign of my sinfulness. It's not a sign of my lack of faith. There were only one or two of those who said, I just needed more faith to be healed. That's a whole other conversation. Don't ever say you need more faith to be healed. It was tough for me to explain that it was okay for me to be sick. Being sick wasn't this evil tragedy or mistake. I think God made me sick. I could be misinterpreting. At the very least, God allowed me to remain sick. I think we can say that. And I think that was okay. I think it's okay to have rough things happen to you. I think it's okay to go deal with struggles. I think it's fine to have imperfect finances. I don't like it, but I think it's poor theology to say that being healthy and wealthy are indications of God's favor or God's plan, and that God's plan can't involve being poor and or sick. I don't know. Maybe I'll get a strongly worded email that tells me otherwise.
No, that's good.
So those were difficult things.
I appreciate that. All right, so last thing, any words of wisdom, any parting advice? We are here with the guru of whatever. So anyway,
here we go.
Here we are. I'm at the mountaintop.
Let's talk about that. So the number one reason that I'm nervous about having this conversation is that I don't feel that I have words of wisdom from on high on the mountaintop. I think that there is a belief that God allows you to deal with terrible pain and tragedy, and as a result, you gain an amount of wisdom equal to the amount of pain that you've dealt with. And I don't know that that's true. I'm still the silly, sometimes prideful, tall, attempts to be a sociable person that I was before. God has changed big parts of who I am deep down, and I'm thankful for it. But I don't know that I've got just tremendous amounts. I don't have the Mount of Transfiguration moment for you. And it makes me, again, I suppose there's a fear of disappointing, a fear of disappointing people, that I don't have this amazing aha moment.
If there was someone suffering,
Mm-hmm.
anything that you would tell them?
It hurts. Even during this interview, I've tried to be happy and peppy and fun. But the honest answer is, it hurts, and it's incredibly difficult, and it's painful, and it will continue on for a long time, and it's not going to be easy. The bedrock that I hit with depression was the hardest that I have ever dealt with. Being trapped in that bed was incredibly unpleasant. There are going to be rough, terrible, awful, unpleasant days that happen. You have to ask, why have those days been allowed to happen? Either God doesn't exist, which doesn't seem to be the attitude of the people who are sitting in the church at 7:30 in the morning watching this. Maybe God is too weak to deal with it, but that doesn't seem to be Scripture.
Or doesn't care,
no,
with some people.
Care. Or he's malicious and evil and takes pleasure in my suffering, and that doesn't seem to line up with Scripture. So the only other option, I think this was C.S. Lewis's argument, was that God loves you and that there is an important plan and that I just don't understand it. Mm-hmm. There is pain and there is suffering, and I don't have to know why. I don't have to know why. And it's okay that you're suffering. Don't just accept it. Don't have learned helplessness from it. Don't stop fighting. Don't stop pushing. But don't also equate the fact that there is pain and difficulty in your life with a sign of abandonment from God. This is weird to say, I am extremely thankful for the awful, awful things that have been happening to me for the last 8 or 9 years. They have been terrible, but I am not who I was when I started. And those of you who have prayed for me are not who you were when you started either. I have been able to see a small percent of what effect that God intended. And it may be that I will continue to be sick forever. I may never finish my seminary degree. I may never get a fun job. I may always have some trace amount of nausea. I would like for that not to be true, but it may be true. And those of you watching this may have some terrible pain that you're going through. It doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be emotional, financial. There's something tough that all of us are dealing with. Just because you're not trapped in a bed sick all day doesn't mean that it's not tough. In the same way that just because I wasn't covered in boils and lose my children like Job did doesn't mean that I wasn't suffering. That all of us are dealing with something terrible, something hard. And you can choose to use that hardness to be resentful towards God or to move away from God, or you can ask Him to make it worth it, to make it where you've learned something, to not waste the difficulty, to thank Him for the hard times, and to do what I was uncomfortable with doing, which is to share, to be vulnerable and open, which is something that I didn't want to do. I'm so prideful. I want people to think of Clayton who has it all together and is fun. But I'm not. And you may not be either. And the only way that we're going to get stronger is if we're open with one another. The only way that God takes advantage of me being sick is by getting to share it with you guys. So I guess as y'all go on to your missional communities, plugged it, maybe you can talk about what the hard thing that you're dealing with is and how you're praying that God uses that and how you're changing as a result of it. And again, your hard thing doesn't have to be big or fancy or special for it to be your hard thing. Whenever I was dealing with depression, I thought, well, I can't tell anyone that I'm dealing with depression because there's nothing depressing that's happening to me. I've got an amazing family. I've got a great church. I had a dream job. I had good friends. I was doing great in classes outside of Greek, terrible language. And so I thought, well, I can't share what's rough and happening with me because my life is good. But it wasn't. There's something difficult that all of us have. And your feelings are legitimate. Things are tough. And it's okay for things to be tough. As long as, in your tough times, you're asking God to make it worth it, to teach us something out of it. I don't know what I'm being taught out of it, but I'm confident that He's teaching me something. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth putting me through this. So I guess those are the words of wisdom from on high.
All right. Well, that's it, man. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Scott.
That's wonderful. Awesome.
Thank you, man.
I appreciate you.
I love you guys.
I love you, man. Wow. Whew.